He is the key architect of every economic policy of the BJP government. And it is indeed my pleasure to welcome Mr. Arun Jaitley, India's Finance Minister, to be joining us right here on ET Now in his first post-budget interview. It is indeed my pleasure to host Mr. Jaitley in this mega ET Now exclusive. Many hopes are riding on you, not just hopes of over 1 billion Indians, but hopes of every stakeholder in the Indian economy. And many people believe you've stood up to the challenge and delivered, so congratulations are in store. I will come to bouquets and brickbats in just a while. But just to talk about the news points, so we are talking on a day when the government has decided to withdraw the proposal to tax EPF. On the floor of the House, you made that statement. If I may be very candid in asking you, did you anticipate this backlash from the middle class?
Well, first of all, let me tell you, it's not a middle class backlash. Let us be clear what we are talking about.
Right.
EPFO is just one scheme.
That's right.
In this scheme, there are 3.7 crore people,
True.
of which about 3.28 are below the salary of 15,000
True.
per month. They are not impacted. It is some employees of private sector and public sector who voluntarily opted for EPFO.
That's right.
Now, our principal objective as a part of the social inclusion philosophy of the government is we persuaded people and connected people to open bank accounts.
That's right.
Through DBT, we are transferring monies in them.
So you want to move toward retirement?
We've expanded small insurances, 2 lakhs each for accident, for death.
Yes.
And in the next phase, I've been saying for the last over a year that we want India to increasingly become a pensioned and an insured society.
True.
So we are now trying to nudge people that whatever your savings are must be in the nature of social security.
True.
During your working life, please invest. When you retire, you get tax exemption on your investments.
True.
You get a sizable part of your deposits back, and some is converted into an annuity or a pension, which is also tax-free.
Right.
So this was to actually persuade them. Now a small section, let us say 30-35 lakhs people out of them,
they're not on board with this.
some of them had a resentment, we don't want it. We prefer a lump sum over a pension.
Right.
I firmly believe pension is better. Now I have therefore tailored the NPS, which is a much bigger scheme, in which there was no exemption on withdrawal. I have given them an incentive, 40% exemption on withdrawal. And if the rest is pension, again a tax exemption.
That's right.
And mind you, NPS is giving the highest return. So I am continuing with the NPS as it is.
But it's EPF that you've decided to
So EPF, if these 30-35 lakh people want their monies back, they're free to have that.
I will just voice an opinion that's been on the social media and offline, that why should the government have this big brotherly attitude? If by withdrawing it, I may ask you, have you given your political rivals the right to stake claim on this withdrawal? Because you had the Congress party come out and say, look, the government has done it.
Let me tell you, Congress did nothing. They did nothing for social security when they were in power. They did nothing to give relief to the middle classes. In budget after budget, I've been giving relief to the middle classes. And therefore, the Congress can hardly stake a claim. Now, if since the employee said this is my money, let me deal with it, so be it. I have no grudge on that issue. But my effort to continue to persuade
is going to continue.
India to become increasingly an insured society and a pension society in the larger interest of social security will continue. NPS will continue as a flagship scheme towards pensions for the unpensioned. It's pensions for the unpensioned.
That's right.
And therefore, if in this scheme, about a few people from the private sector or the public sector want to withdraw their monies and put it elsewhere where they think they are better. So and let me tell you, the NPS returns are far higher.
Fair point indeed. But do you believe in hindsight, this was an error of judgment on your part, even though the fact that you believe this is the way we need to move forward?
I don't think so. I think in politics one will have to be flexible. These are not issues on which governments have to have an open mind. And therefore, in budget after budget, when you make announcements, you see the reactions. After all, we are a democracy. We are entitled to respond to a public opinion. And therefore, why should I give anybody an opportunity to misunderstand us? Our intentions were completely bona fide. They remain bona fide. And I'm glad a lot of sensible sections have started speaking, why not have a pension society? What's wrong with it?
Yes. If I may ask you one last question on this issue, and you know this, because you believe there is a compelling case for this, but on the floor of the House you said this needs a comprehensive review. Now both you and I know that in political and policy parlance, a comprehensive review often means it's off the table. Is it off the table, or are you willing to revisit?
It will be, according to me, you have now different schemes. You have an NPS option,
that's right,
and you have the EPFO option. Now people are free to choose between them. You have the pension option, you have the withdrawal option. The pension option gives you better returns. The withdrawal option gives you a tax exemption, but the returns are not so high. Therefore, let people choose the best out of them.
So there was a lot of speculation before your budget whether you will meet or breach the fiscal deficit. You've of course decided to meet the fiscal deficit, not just for this year but even at 3.5%. What I think a lot of people want clarity on is that because you've spoken about the need to review the FRBM Act, which you rightly say has been observed more in its breach than in its conformity, we'd like to know, is 3.5% for next year also cast in stone, or depending on the recommendations of this committee?
Well, I am going to endeavour my very best to continue with 3.5.
Right.
And I'll give you the good reason for it. We are now recognized as the fastest growing major economy in the world.
Right.
As net consumers of oil, we are the beneficiary of the oil prices.
True.
So at the present level of oil prices and as a fast moving economy, if we can't maintain our fiscal discipline
right now, then when?
I don't think this is, it would be inappropriate if we are not able to do that. What is more important than meeting fiscal deficit, I think, is the quality of fiscal deficit.
That's right, yes.
My predecessors also met fiscal deficits, but they met it with huge cuts.
That's right.
Current year, I have met it without a cut. And hopefully in the next year, I'll endeavour to do the same.
When you endeavour to do the same, by when do you expect this committee to be formed, its recommendations? Will they be...
Well, I think there's a process of giving effect to the budget announcement. That process will now start. And therefore, I'll tell you, I consulted a cross-section of opinion.
That's right.
The predominant opinion of industry was fiscal deficit doesn't matter under these circumstances.
But they're the ones who are giving you a thumbs up after meeting it today.
To the politicians, barring a few, were not concerned.
That's right.
They wanted to spend more.
True.
The economists predominantly felt that you must stick to the fiscal deficit. But some of the economists felt that while sticking to the fiscal deficit for the future, just analyze whether it should be a dot figure or it should be a narrow range. A range of 2 or 3.
Right.
Let's say it's 3.4 to 3.7, that kind of a range. So that you keep moving downwards, but you give yourself enough flexibility that if the private sector is not investing, should you spend another 30,000 extra on some scheme or the other.
And not be bound by the last decimal point.
Not be bound by the last decimal point. Now, I don't know what the answer to that advice is. And therefore, let the experts apply their mind. Once their recommendations come, we'll certainly consider it.
Why I'm asking this question, sir, is what if their recommendation says that 3.5% is not, you don't need to meet 3.5% for next year? Will you then go by that recommendation?
I don't think the committee is going to be concerned with this year. The committee is going to be concerned with a theoretical issue, a dot figure to the last decimal, or is it a narrow range?
I will now move focus and talk to you about the big thumbs up that you've got from the markets. If you see the rally and the unprecedented rally that one did see last week, it was all on account of the fact that the markets are very impressed with what you've done in the budget, whether it is meeting the fiscal deficit or deciding to spend and focusing on the quality of the fisc. The section that's not impressed are some global commentators who have in the past been big advocates of your government and who've called this budget more UPA 3 than NDA 2. How are you going to blunt that criticism?
Well, I think commenting is the easiest thing to do.
That's true, at least in hindsight.
Yeah, at least in the hindsight. If I wish I had another career, I should be a commentator. So I could comfortably write the government must spend more, particularly when the private sector is not spending. The government must not tax more, but at the same time the government must meet the fiscal deficit.
True, yes.
Now commentators can suggest all this. I think India is doing, under the circumstances, reasonably well, if not remarkably well. With every step, we are moving in the right direction. We are maintaining reasonable growth levels.
Right.
We are looking for the difficult areas which exist. infrastructure, rural expenditure,
yes.
banking sector. These are the more difficult areas, and therefore we've concentrated on these areas to resolve these problems. And hopefully, I think the direction which we have followed will continue to maintain the targeted growth rates.
If I may talk to you about the entirety of your budget, in its focus, in its presentation, in its entirety, this is obviously a budget for rural India, and rightly so. People appreciate the fact that rural economy is in distress. You've recognized that, and you've done a lot for this. But this does bring me to a very politically sensitive question, that while you have made the highest ever allocation to MNREGA, you also stand to eat some humble pie because you've been a critic of that scheme in the past.
Let me be very clear.
Have you tried to change the narrative given the opposition?
I'll tell you, when the Prime Minister said that the bill is a living monument of our failures.
That's right.
It clearly means that after 60 years of being in power, or 50 out of those 60 years in power, if the Congress thought such a law is necessary, then you've done pretty little to deal with poverty. That's what he had in mind. Now the object is that I must now put money into the rural areas. How do you put money into the rural areas? Irrigation, electrification, housing, toilets, social sector, health and schools. Then you spend money through rural roads, you spend money through interest subvention, and you create an employment through Manrega.
That's right.
Now in each of these cases, we've increased the quantum of expenditure, in some cases many-fold.
True.
Now Manrega for the UPA was like the fiscal deficit figure, that you give a lot of lip sympathy to Manrega, you allocate 40,000 crores and end up spending 27,000 crores. That's what the UPA used to do. Now last year we allocated about 35,000 crores, we spent the whole amount.
That's right.
In the current year.
Yes.
This year if I spend the whole amount, this will be the largest ever spending on Manrega. Because I am now seeing Manrega as probably one instrument of putting more money into the rural areas, particularly when there is a rural distress. Now let me just use this opportunity to say, when you said it's pro-rural or pro-urban,
right.
I think some of the suggestions in the budget are really solid. They take care of what the requirements of economy are. So you needed money in the rural areas.
You've addressed every section by and large.
No, you needed money in infrastructure. We've increased it. You needed some money to be put into the banks. The Reserve Bank also has been quite supportive in those decisions. So they've also helped in adding capital. And then you needed to carry the reform further.
That's right.
So your Aadhaar legislation, you're freeing up the transport system, your FDI in agri-products marketing. So you've taken 5 or 7, so you've taken step by step, you're moving towards a more liberal economy, a more market-centric economy, but then taking care of the areas where you need to spend.
Is required. If I may ask you, sir, if I may move to the budget math, given your political capital, given that you have the popular mandate firmly behind you, why is it that your government is not being bold enough when it comes to asset sale? Because if you actually look at it, many people are now beginning to think, is the government shying away because of the whole political climate? This whole rhetoric about the Sood Boot Ki Sarkar, is that making you look away from what was privatization in NDA 1?
It's not. It's not. You see,
is
last
it
year,
a taboo word in your government?
No, it's not a taboo word. I strongly support the idea. So you had a divestment program.
That's right.
Which, let me tell you, is working much better than ever it has in the past. So in the last 21 months, I have divested much more than any government in the past.
And it's not about the target, it's also about the quality of divestment.
It's about the quality. I have a divestment tomorrow morning again.
Yes.
Second, in last year's budget, I also spoke of privatization.
True.
This year, the markets have been so choppy, so volatile, that for some of the stocks, it was not the right time in order to divest. So I held back. Hopefully, if the markets recover, and we are on upward
which
swing,
they are after your budget.
Then probably I'll look at it again. Thirdly, I am not only for privatization. In some cases, I'm also looking at independent asset sales. So if you look at the paragraph on divestment this time, I've said that public sector units can dissect certain assets
and sell them, yes,
and then sever them and sell them independently and use that money elsewhere. So you are now recycling your assets. Let's say a power company.
Why does it need the land bank sometimes that it does?
No, forget the land bank. A power company has 20 plants. It sells off 2 of them to the private sector, and with the money it gets, it sets up 2 more. So the country as a whole will get 4 power plants.
Right, yes.
So therefore, this is something that is absolutely new, this asset sale, which I have spoken about in the budget this time.
So when you say asset sale, if I will be candid enough to ask you, when you say 20,500 crore rupees has been is a targeted amount from strategic sale, are you open to selling stake in profitable PSUs to under 51%? Because that would mean that you're being bold there. Are you open to doing that?
See, I am not looking for labels. I have to also see how much is the money which is required. What do I require money from? I am not using this money only to pay salaries.
True, yes.
You see, that is why I have said this is public property. It's for me to decide as a government whether I hold 60% shares in a company or 50% shares in a company. Now the balance I get from 10%, should I hold 10% more shares or should I set up 2 more All India Institutes of Medical Sciences?
True, yes.
So this money is to be used for asset creation. So what should be the form of the government asset is really the management which concerns me.
And that's the balancing act that finance ministers like yourselves have to do. One more question, sir, on your stakes. And there is a raging public debate, and I know you have a very strong view on this. The Suti stake that you hold. There are people who believe that why do you hold that stake? It's a good time, it's a reserve, why don't you tap it? And of course there's another lobby that believes it's strategic stake.
Well,
would you want to hold on to that stake?
No, I am not giving any final opinion. There are some parts of Suti which can be very easily sold. There are some parts where there is some argument in favor of it being strategic. If ever we need the resources, we'll take a decision. We'll cross the bridge when we come to that. Today, I am not going to indulge in an academic debate. I will wait with the kind of capital requirements that I have.
Why sell when you don't need to?
Absolutely. These are all assets which are going to grow. So you have the Axis Bank, you have a company like Larsen and Toubro, you have ITC, and there are many people who give you an advice that at least some of these companies are professionally managed, not owner-driven.
That's right, yeah.
And therefore you should have more companies of this kind.
And why destabilize the blue chip companies?
Why destabilize great companies? So there are weights, there is a weight in arguments on both sides. We'll consider it if that necessity ever arises.
One more question on your revenue stream, sir. Do you believe in hindsight that you've been a little too ambitious with spectrum sale? I know 98,000 crore rupees is not all the target.
I'll tell you.
But telcos tell you that we don't want 700 megahertz and we may not buy so much.
You see, I'll tell you, there are 3 components of
That's
this.
right, yes.
There is some money that you get annually from the telcos. There is a significant part that you will get because in the first year of the spectrum sale you get 25%.
True, yes.
Therefore you will get that. And there is some money which is locked in legal disputes. So even though I am conscious of the fact we may not get the entire amount, even if we get some part of it, I think it's a target which can be met.
Fair point indeed, and that should bring in a lot of boost and optimism there. If I may move focus, and I think what you've got a huge thumbs up from is the fact that you've decided to spend more. You believe that the public investment has to be an engine of growth right now. But if you look at the numbers, 2.47 lakh crore rupees versus 2.37 lakh crore rupees, the quantum has been a lot smaller than it was last year for obvious reasons.
You see, the oil prices have hit almost the bottom.
That's right, yes.
So in terms of generation of revenue, I can't expect oil to go down further.
True, yes.
And there's a limit to what new taxes you can put. All the new taxes in a 20 lakh crore budget I have put is less than 1%. And therefore, you have to manage within means. So you divert your expenditure and maintain that. For instance, on national highways, if I maintain the same level of expenditure, now my 100% of last year on rural roads now becomes 60% of the total amount to be spent because states are also going to spend.
That's
so
right.
that makes quite a difference.
And some people also believe that the off-budget financing options that you have in place is a very good idea, unlike in the past when people have just depended on the budget. The idea last year was that you wanted to crowd in the private sector investment. We've had a discussion on this, and you do believe that there are not many other reasons why the private sector is not investing. By when do you believe Indian corporates are going to lose in their purse?
See, I'll tell you, the Indian corporates suffer from what the economics says the twin balance sheet problem.
That's true.
The ability of the banks to support growth has been restricted because the corporates are holding the money.
True.
And their businesses are not doing well. Now, last year we spent a significant amount of time in addressing each of these sectors. we've addressed steel, we've addressed highways. The series of steps that I am saying for dispute resolution, we are addressing stalled projects.
True.
We've addressed sugar. We've partly addressed textiles. We've significantly addressed power. Now, if these sectors can be addressed, and the significant amount of NPAs do come down after climaxing on 31st March, they are likely to go up because of provisioning.
Right, that's right.
But thereafter, you reach the peak, and then it starts coming down. And then I think the stretched balance sheets will also ease up as far as the corporates are concerned.
And that is when you expect
I think it will take a couple of quarters, but then the fighting spirit
of India Inc. will perhaps kick in.
Probably emerge.
One of the criticisms that you have received, and not really much in a very serious vein, but people believe that it's difficult being rich in India now, whether it's the agri-cess, whether it's the infra-cess.
I think
there is this sense that...
I'll tell you, there are three categories of products, oblique people, who have to pay more after this budget. First, the products which degrade environment.
That's true.
Products which have an adverse impact on health. I think is understandable.
True.
And the third category is the rich pay a little more. And that I think is a global policy almost anywhere in the world. I can't make the middle classes pay more. I can't make the poor people pay more. They pay more when the indirect taxes go out. Therefore, it's much better to tax those for whom it's small money.
So they shouldn't be complaining actually. There is a social obligation.
There's a social obligation, and I don't see the rich complaining too much because the rich can afford to pay a little more.
What the corporates perhaps are complaining a little more, sir, is that you haven't gone down from the 30% to the 25% level as much as they're expected.
I'll tell you.
Are you looking to backload cuts, or I mean, there is one fear in corporate India, and I must voice is that are there second thoughts as far as this?
There are no second thoughts. I had linked it up with the exemptions being waived off.
But the industry is also divided on exemptions being phased out.
This year, exemptions have not been phased out.
That's right, yeah.
So I would be out of pocket. Next year, some of the exemptions are phased out. So I'll save a little and therefore pass that on. Therefore, in order to show my bona fides, my first announcement is that all new manufacturing companies can straight away start with 25%.
That's right, yes.
So the 25% commitment is actually partly implemented. Now others will have to be slowly brought down to 25%. The next is, as far as the SME sector is concerned, up to 5 crore turnover, I do a 1% cut. So I lose a little revenue without gaining anything from the exemptions being waived off.
True, yes.
And therefore I didn't want to be out of pocket. Then how do I maintain the 3.5?
That's right. And people will come climbing down on this. But sir, the reason why I asked you that question is that many people believe that the industry is also a little divided on these exemptions being phased out. While one part of the industry believes it's a good idea, the other part is up in arms, pharma, R&D, IT, and people like that. How are you going to wade through this?
I think pharma R&D is getting, in some cases, 200% exemption. Now, if 200 becomes 150, or 150 will eventually become 100, you still have a full exemption.
That's right.
I don't see they have a good case to complain.
Fair point indeed, and I think that should be learnt and heard very, very importantly. I do know, sir, that the reviewing of the long-term capital gains tax was being actively considered in the budget-making process. You chose not to do this. Was these volatile capital markets that dissuaded you? And is there something on the radar? Because in principle, people believe that income of all kinds should be treated at par.
Well, there are arguments on both sides. The government addresses all arguments and takes a final opinion. Now, I can't go into the details of what all proposals came. You get thousands of proposals during the budget. You crystallize on a few of them. I don't think I would like at this stage to enter into a debate and create unnecessary speculation as far as the markets are concerned. At the end of the day, today, what was being speculated in the media did not happen.
Fair point indeed, sir. You know what you have done in the budget is that you've decided to put it on statute about the dispute resolution mechanism. I'll come to that in just a bit, but you also had a great chance to completely axe the retro tax. Why don't you just do it for once and for all? It would have got you unprecedented goodwill.
You see, I have moved in the direction of resolving disputes.
That's right.
People who haven't paid taxes, I've given them a last opportunity, but with penalty. 50% penalty. In the past, there was no penalty.
That's right.
So it's not an amnesty.
So that fair and lovely argument is out of
So the 97 scheme was, in 97, you pay at the 87 prices and don't pay a penalty.
Yeah. And you have said in the past how tax buoyancy from one year to the other was completely
and the tax buoyancy next year didn't take place. So I have said pay at current values and pay 50%. So it's a normal tax proposal. Two, all cases of direct and indirect tax pending in appeals, I have given a resolution mechanism.
True.
On retrospective tax, since the dispute is before the courts or the arbitrator, I had hoped that the dispute would be over. Unfortunately, it is not. I have therefore to show the government of India's bona fide, A, we don't tax retrospectively, B, we don't issue fresh notices, C, I take another significant step forward and say, since the tax was retrospective, it is unfair to expect interest and penalty. So if anybody wants to settle, he can settle on principle alone.
Yes. When I interviewed Mr. Chidambaram, your predecessor before the budget, he said that if I had 282, I would have repealed the retro tax. And I asked him, why did you not do it when you came in as finance minister? To which his argument was, I would have been accused of being corrupt. But you have 282, and which is why I go back to the question.
I don't think 282 has anything to do with corrupt. Let's be very clear. To repeal that, you only need a majority in the Lok Sabha.
That's right, yes.
And the UPA had a comfortable majority in the last Lok Sabha.
You think in some sense the buck has been passed on to you?
No, I think it was a government which suffered from policy paralysis. So that government didn't act. A, the tax itself was retrograde.
Right.
And B, subsequently they didn't act because they were in a paralyzed state. And therefore now to dig up, now pretend to be champions and say if I had 282. But of course you had 282 as a UPA in the Lok Sabha. It's hardly an explanation.
That's fair. That's a fair point indeed, and that's exactly what I told him when I was talking to him in that interview. But sir, I know you've recused yourself from the Vodafone tax matter, but as the finance minister, if I may ask you a larger question, do you expect a resolution there? Because so far the response has been rather lukewarm.
Well, I normally don't comment on the case because vicariously I was connected with some part of the dispute at one stage. It's an issue which is the ball is in their court. They have to meet the revenue secretary, sort out with the revenue secretary. They've had meetings in the past and it's for them to respond.
So you have done your bit as far as sticking to the fiscal deficit and the fiscal policy in New Delhi is concerned. The ball is really in the RBI governor's court. By when do you expect him to relent on rates, and how much is the expectation from North Block at this stage?
Let me tell you, North Block's expectation is what the rest of the country's expectation is. But then past experience has shown that the RBI in India is a mature institution. It has to balance, let us say, the rates with the inflation, with the potential for growth. And I'm quite certain that the appropriate time the RBI will take a considered view on this.
I want to just quickly take a few questions on banking, sir, because that really is the big elephant in the room. You have said that consolidation in banking is imminent. India is better off with fewer banks and not 27 like right now. The argument that some people are making is it a wise option to merge a weak and a strong bank? Does it not end up reflecting on a strong bank's balance sheet?
We haven't taken a decision on that matter.
Right.
We've in principle said we are open for consolidation. In public sector banks, 52% is the minimum that the government will come to. Now, whether the subsidiaries must merge in the parent bank or whether some regional banks must merge with each other or whether a weak or a strong will emerge, we'll certainly take the best possible advice in the matter and then decide.
But any low-hanging fruits on your radar right now?
No, I'm not going to speculate, but these are the various options which are possible. Now, there are many people who believe that 27 banks and then subsidiaries, does India need so many public sector banks or does it need some fewer but solid banks which are able to compete?
Given the NPA mess, sir, a lot of people believe that the victims of downturn should definitely be handheld and the government should go out of their way to protect them, but the law needs to be a little more stringent around willful defaulters. I'm going to quote a case which is in public domain. Do you believe it is the right time to set an example for willful defaulters? Because KSA is very much in the public domain right now.
I don't get into individual cases.
Right.
There are two kinds of NPAs. One is the NPAs which are on account of the industrial downturn.
True, yes.
The steel sector suffered, the infrastructure sector suffered, the power sector suffered. And therefore, the balance sheets of the companies impacted on the balance sheets of the banks. Now, in some of the cases, people are going to take some industry is taking bona fide steps to sell off assets. Government is taking some steps so that the companies come back into the green, so that their balance sheets reflect on the strength of the banks itself. Now, these are cases where we'll have to give a slightly longer rope because we don't want a crisis situation. But there are cases which border on some more than questionable practices. And there I think the provisions of whatever laws exist will come into play. Now you have two sets of laws.
Right.
If people have indulged in frauds, you have the Central Bureau of Investigation.
That's right.
If there are proceeds of crime, that is siphoning, you'll have the PMLA in operation.
That's right. Yes.
If the criminal offences don't exist, but the company is unable to pay, then the SDR mechanism that the Reserve Bank has set in can operate.
Yes.
Then you have the possibility of the insolvency law now almost appearing to be real, where the creditors can move in and have a new arrangement by which a new management come in, people will exit. These are various options which are possible.
At no time one can forget that you're a lawyer because you've just quoted every provision there is.
No, therefore there are different kinds of cases. Cases where the industrial downturn has contributed.
And that's a different ballgame altogether.
No, but there you have to still take all the steps to recover the bank's money. It's public money.
Yes.
And cases where there is some form of an offence committed, I think the law then has to take its course.
So because you're in the hot seat now, and because you have the advantage of having an insider's view on this matter, without getting into the merits of the KFA case, if I may just ask you, do you believe the enforcement agencies have been a little late on this matter? Because it has really caught the attention of the entire country right now.
Well, I'm glad it has. I'm glad it has, and it will have two good advantages. The first advantage will be the enforcement agencies will all act. All institutions, whether it's the courts or it's governments or it's banks, will now be compelled to act. And I see a third silver lining in
Which
this.
is what?
If anybody now tries to stop the bankruptcy law, he'll be seen to be on the side of those who has indulged in frauds.
You're actually pushing your legislation there, and we wish you all the very best. But the two quick questions in the end, sir. The DRT has ruled in favor of SBI, and it has said that as far as Mr. Mallya's deal with Diageo is concerned, SBI has a right to stake claim. SBI, of course, has moved to the Supreme Court. They either want him arrested or his passport impounded, and ED has also moved on this matter. As the custodian of both those institutes in the HSC, are you willing to throw your weight behind both of these demands?
Well, I think it's not only a legal but a moral obligation that every banking institution in India has to recover the last pie.
That's right.
We can't accept a situation where 15 or 20 people are sitting on so much money of the banks that the ability of the banks to lend to thousands of others
has been crunched.
Because that is where the ability of the banks to lend for growth itself gets adversely impacted. And therefore, whatever steps the banking institutions are going to take in this matter, the government of India will not only strongly stand behind them, but actively encourage them to protect their own interests, which is also the interest, which is also the larger public interest, because it's public money which has gone into the banks. After all, I'm taxing the people of India to put money into the capital of these banks now.
And that's also another debate altogether. Are you willing to give up on the GST just yet, or is the opposition willing to come around?
I think there is a lot of public support in favor of the GST. It's something that helps the Indian economy. And I don't see any reason where there should be an obstructive environment to protect a good step. The world has slowed down. We need to move on. And therefore, we need firewalls around our own system. And I think to help in that growth process, the GST has a very important role.
Do you believe the opposition is willing to play ball?
I think there are very large section in the opposition which strongly supports the GST. And I do believe the numbers in Parliament should be squarely in favor of the GST.
If I may ask you a last question, I will go back to your budget. You've received, I'm sure, many bouquets and brickbats, more bouquets in this case than brickbats. What is the one compliment that brought the widest smile on your face, and the one criticism that really annoyed you? And the compliment can't be your Prime Minister's, because this is as much his as your budget.
I think there is a sense of satisfaction that the whole government has, that we have actually, while keeping the reform momentum on, still being able to obliterate this dividing line. You can do a lot of things for poor people, for vulnerable sections, for rural areas, and still continue the reform process. There is no contradiction.
So there can be a market economy with rural economy that
so the benefits and the resources of the market economy are diverted to the rural economy. I think that's the balancing act that this budget achieved.
What's the one criticism that annoyed you most?
I don't think criticisms really annoy us, but I think there are provisions of the budget which takes time to register. And therefore, there's a large section which feels that jewelry should not be taxed in India.
That's right, yes. And people have been protesting against it. On that note, sir, thank you very much for speaking to ET Now and the Times Network.
Thank you.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.